OK, we're going to shift tack now. Talk about students who are starting, or some of them are starting university in the coming weeks, and are going to be offered consent classes. What are they? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But Freshers' Week is often a time for first-year students to let their hair down and have a good time before the lectures really begin in earnest. This year, many campuses are offering workshops about sex and relationships, as well as the more traditional activities, the pub crawls, etc. Do students need lessons in consent, or is this nannying young adults in their first foray, for many of them, into an adult world? And will people who have problems with this really attend a session anyway? Let's discuss this with Susan Edwards, who's Dean of Law at the University of Buckingham and author of Sex and Gender in the Legal Process, and lawyer, and author of Why Rape Culture is a Dangerous Myth, from Steubenville to Ched Evans. That's Luke Gittos. A very good morning to both of you. Susan, if we can start with you. We'll have a lot of viewers who are shaking their heads just simply because they won't understand what a consent class is. What do we mean by consent class?
Well, first of all, I think the language is not the right language to use. I think we should be talking about sexual and equality awareness. To talk about consent classes, I think, is far too narrow, and it does rather suggest that we're going to be giving training on a very specific area of sexual consent. It's much wider, it's much broader, and it needs to be much wider and broader, taking in a whole range of behaviour, conduct, and the environment within which students study. OK, but just give us, Susan, if you would, a sense of what people will learn, avoiding that narrow definition, in these classes. What's going on in them? Well, what is being proposed is a direct response to the problem of sexual harassment, which has been rising not only in society but within universities. And if we take the lead from the National Union of Students, so this is not about nannying, the National Union of Students themselves have drawn attention in their reports to the rising sexual harassment on university campuses. And about 68% they have recorded last year of cases. And they've also discovered that 1 in 7 students suffer from serious sexual assault. So there's a real problem. It's coming from students. It's not just coming from the educators. The educators are obliged in any event, they are under a duty in fact, to have health and safety policies, to have sexual harassment policies, to have equality and diversity policies. In my view, having what you call consent, I think it should be renamed, as I said, sexual awareness, sexual equality awareness, discussions and workshops should actually be part of that overall holistic approach.
All right. Luke Gittos, there's Susan talking about these classes and talking about them being discussions, discursive. Are they discursive, or are they didactic? Are they legalistic? Are they telling people how to behave?
Well, I actually think they're a dangerous combination of all of the things you've talked about. I mean, there are lessons included in these consent classes about the legal definitions of consent, and they're very much built around ensuring that students avoid an allegation of rape or sexual violence. I think this is an enormously destructive idea to introduce onto a campus. Most of these students are away from home for the first time. A lot of them are going to be unsure about their own sexuality, about what they enjoy when they take someone home after a night out. A lot of them are going to be confused about those things. And a lot of these things are going to happen while the students are, you know, let's face it, drunk, on drugs or on other things. So a lot of these experiences that students are going to be having at university don't fit into the kind of very nice, natural, holistic coursework that's being anticipated. And I think at worst, it creates this idea that all students' sexual experiences are going to fit into something which is, you know, straightforward and easy. Actually, student sex lives are probably the most complicated out of all of us, because they're going to university for the first time, they're working out who they are, they're working out what they like. And I think encouraging students to view all of their sexual contact through the prism of sexual violence, which I think is what these consent classes do, I think is incredibly problematic. I'll also say another thing. There is no problem with rape and sexual violence specific to campuses in this country. We must deal directly with the claim that there is some kind of epidemic of sexual violence. The NUS continually put out these statistics, you know, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, but the way they reach those statistics is incredibly dubious. So firstly, they use self-selecting surveys, which means that they actively invite people to contribute to these surveys, which, if you're an academic, you will know that that's an extremely flawed methodology. It encourages people to report. It's not a random one quick. One quick addition. They also use a very, very broad definition of what constitutes harassment and sexual violence. So it will go from everything from unwanted comments about the way someone looks right up to rape and serious sexual violence. So conflating all of these things, bundling all these things in together in order to try and present this crazy epidemic of violence on our campuses, I think is extremely dangerous. And because consent classes arise as a result of these figures, I think they should be gotten rid of. Students need to use common sense, courtesy, but also need to go out and discover who they are and be free to do that without
Yes,
some
they
NUS
do
official
need to
looking over their shoulder at every turn.
Luke, they do need to use common sense and courtesy, but let's first of all take the point about consent. If we're looking at sexual relations and consent, the law is quite clear that anybody who consents to any sexual encounter should have a free and full choice to do that, and they should have the capacity to consent. And one of the major problems is the intake of alcohol, the excessive intake of alcohol, which actually leads to some of these difficult situations. But please don't just beline the NUS survey, because it's not just the NUS survey. Universities UK are also setting up these kinds of classes. So it's those
Susan,
responsible for university education. And
I was talking about the figure.
across the board, not only in universities, we know that sexual assault and sexual abuse and sexual violence is absolutely rife within society. It doesn't stop at the door of the university or at the door of the dormitory. It is reflected within universities. We have a duty as educators, as those who care for students, those who care for the well-being and mental well-being of students, to ensure that they are supported, that they feel empowered. This isn't about nannying. In my view, this is about empowering each and every student to be able to stand up, to be able to say no in a sexual encounter, to be able to support other students. And this is about helping men in as much as it's helping women. And it should not be, and I agree with you on this, it should not be just narrowly focused on consent within a sexual encounter. It's about the whole environment within the university. And if I could just say, if we look at the media, pornography, the representation of women, especially in the media, is part of a broader context in which we learn how to respond and live with one another. And we should be challenging and contesting that as well.
Can I come back on that? You know,
Please.
decades and decades of research has failed to prove any connection between pornography, attitudes, misogynistic media, and incidents of sexual violence.
Well, then the advertising industry
let me get back.
should
Let me get back to
advertising, because
I'll come back to the
what you
consent
see
point.
and what is influences
Can I just
what
come back
you
on
do.
the consent classes?
Luke, do, because we're digressing when we're getting into porn. Go on.
Yeah, sure. So the consent classes, I'm glad that my co-panelist thinks that the definition of consent is straightforward, because it's not. There's a whole series of very complicated legal judgments about the extent of alcohol inducement that leads people to lack consent, blah, blah, blah. I won't go into it, but it's incredibly complicated. And there's no chance that students are going to be able to get their head around this in a consent class. But, you know, whoever runs this, whether it's Universities UK or the NUS, it's not something that student bodies should have anything to do with.
Okay.
Intimacy and people's sexual relations are between two people, and they need to be negotiated individually. Often that's a complex and difficult process. Hold on a second. I haven't quite finished yet. Well, it is. This is exactly what you're talking about. You're saying that we need to broaden this out to encompass all aspects of students' sex lives. I think it's absolutely perverse. It's just not something that we should be concerned with. It's often something which is deeply private to an individual student. And I think what you're going to see, if you have Universities UK and the NUS dictating to students what amounts to a healthy relationship, you are going to be running roughshod over a whole host of individual perspectives on that issue. Most students have to figure this out for themselves. They have to figure out who they are. They have to figure out what they like when they're entering into sexual relationships with another person. They don't want this dictated to by some official at the NUS or at Universities UK, because they like to pretend that this is straightforward.
Well, of course I agree.
That love and sex and falling in love is
we raise
straightforward and easy.
About
it's not.
racism.
It's
we raise awareness about homophobia. We raise awareness about a wide range of social and cultural matters. We should be raising awareness about sexual intimacy and sexual and equality issues within universities. And if consent is part of that, good, but it must be much, much broader. And I agree with some of the points you raised, of course, Luke.
To what extent should compulsion play a part here, Susan? Hang on, Luke. To what extent, Susan, should compulsion play a part here? Should fresher students be compelled to attend these courses?
Is that a question for me?
It is. That's why I said Susan. Yeah, go on.
Should they be compelled? Well, of course, this is the debate that's going on with Justin Greening within the school situation. I think at this point, no, university students, college students should not be compelled to attend these classes, but I would hope that in time they are done in a sensitive context, and it's about empowerment and it's about awareness. It's not at the other end of the continuum about dictating to them about matters of sexual intimacy. It's taking a holistic approach in terms of saying, we care about your education, we care that you will get a job at the end of your course, we care that you'll get a good degree, we also care about your safety, your well-being, your mental health, and sexual experience and the context in which it happens is just a part of that,
Luke,
and I welcome that.
Yeah, Luke, what's wrong? What's wrong with, as you say, young men and women who are feeling their way into a world of complicated morality? What's wrong with discussing in a consultative way with some of these young people, some of these young men in particular, the idea of consent to something which is reversible, which is retractable? I mean, that's an important idea. What's wrong with discussing that?
I don't think there's any problem with students discussing it amongst themselves, but when it becomes a problem is when it becomes a process sort of Maoist re-education, which is exactly what how NUS societies talk about it. It's this idea that young male students have no idea about this sort of thing and they need to be radically re-educated in their sexual morality. I just think it's such a disastrous, poisonous thing to tell students the first day they arrive at university they're getting taught how to avoid a rape allegation. I think it's a perverse thing to do. But let me just say they are already compelling students to attend. At Oxbridge, students have to attend these classes as part and parcel of their induction process. So it is becoming compulsive. And I know that, we'd like to think of this an enormous, holistic, broad-ranging re-education process. But really what you're talking about is PSHE for people who are basically 18 and 19 years old. Students have a basic idea about what constitutes consent, and they need to use their own judgment, their own common sense, in order to take that forward. And I think the vast majority...
We really could go on, but we're not going to go on. OK, Luke Gittos, Susan Edwards, thanks both very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Still to come on Sky News.